Okay, we're going to start now by looking at the life of Josiah. He experienced a third of the three great revivals, Jehoshaphat, Hezekiah, and now Josiah. It's under Josiah's family. It's his family that will see the downfall of Jerusalem. So that's how close we are to this. Josiah, several of his sons reign. And then also, no, not one of his brothers. Several of his sons and one of his grandsons, reigns. And so we're right in this family now, very close family, where we'll see the downfall of Jerusalem in the southern kingdom. His reign began when he was 8 years old, and it looks like he immediately, as a young man, decided, and this could again be attributed to someone else who was his spiritual mentor. I've often thought that it might have not been his revival. There's a lot of debate whether Josiah experienced a true revival, because the prophet Jeremiah, Jeremiah never mentions the revival of Josiah, never talks about it. And it would seem certainly as if he's the prophet alive during his time, that he would have said something about this great revival. There's no mention of it. All Jeremiah, of course, he's the weeping prophet, because he's the one announcing during the time of the fall of Jerusalem. That's why he was weeping. But he never talks about a great revival going on. So there's a lot of debate whether this was much of a revival, and one answer for that could be that it wasn't really Josiah's revival, that it was a spiritual mentor. It happened during the reign of Josiah, and he was kind of on board with it, but he wasn't like Hezekiah or Jehoshaphat, where he truly had revival himself. So anyway, but he ordered repairs to be made to the temple. He appointed men to carry out the task. He repaired the temple under supervision of Hilkiah, the high priest. There's a possible answer for that. And while they're repairing the temple, they find the Pentateuch hidden in the walls. I just think that is so ironic. This is the temple. What would be in the temple? Obviously, the law. I mean, right? Anybody would know that in God's temple is going to be a copy of God's word. And it's not there. It obviously hadn't been there for some time. And he finds a copy of it hidden in the wall. Somebody put it there. You know, if you go back, it probably happened during the reign of Manasseh, who's the most wicked king of Judah. Quite a few years before him. But anyway, he finds the Pentateuch, which is just odd to me. He finds the Pentateuch. These are God's people. And, this is not your normal little kid finding his Bible. It had been put there on purpose some years, quite a few years earlier than this. Yes?
This is before the use of synagogues in all of Israel, right? So there really weren't centers of...
Oh, absolutely. Okay, now you had Levites. Levites would have been teaching the people. I know Hebron was a place where there were Levites. That was a Levitical city and a city of refuge. So you had places where they were teaching, but this is before the time of the synagogue. There was no position of a scribe. There are not many copies of Scripture, for sure.
I'm just wondering, because wasn't it the duty of every king to copy a Bible or copy the Pentateuch? I'm just wondering, did they only keep one? Like there was only supposed to be one in the land, or do you think anybody else would have had one, but it was harder to get to?
I'm sure there were other copies. I'm sure there were other copies.
But not the whole thing, maybe.
But not the entire thing. And just because we say that every king was supposed to, doesn't mean that half of the kings probably didn't. God instructed them to, but most of the kings weren't good kings. But certainly there would have been other copies of it, but for some reason Josiah didn't have any of them. And didn't have access to any of them. I'm sure he could have if he'd have gone looking, but still. Shaphan the scribe reads the law to the people. They consult the prophet, a woman, prophetess. She issues a prophecy about Judah, that God would soon punish them, and about Josiah, that God's punishment wouldn't come until he died. Okay, so we're close to the end. They make a lot of contributions to repair the temple, and they celebrate the Passover correctly for the first time since the days of Samuel, the last judge. So this is the first celebration of the Passover done correctly since there is a king. All right? That's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. All right, so the final years of Josiah's reign saw tremendous changes taking place on the international scene. Now here's what I briefly mentioned right before we got started. Nineveh had finally fallen under the combined attacks of Medes and Babylonians in 612 BC. Nineveh is the capital, one of the major cities of the Assyrian Empire. What's left of the Assyrian army fled westward to a stronghold on the Euphrates River named Carchemish. Okay? I have here somewhere. What did I do with it? There we go. All right. The captivity of Judah. This is a map that we'll reference quite a bit. Over here is Nineveh and Assyria. Carchemish is over to basically close to Haran. It's the top of the Fertile Crescent, the northern part of what we call the Fertile Crescent. Here's Carchemish to the north, and Egypt is also involved in this. Egypt says, we don't want the Babylonians coming too close to us. So Egypt goes up and ties in with what's left of the Assyrian Empire, and I'm sure it was all, this is for our security, our national security. We're going to go up and help the small guy try to defeat these aggressors coming from the east. So Egypt comes up and heads up to Carchemish to meet the Assyrian remnant. Josiah must have thought that he could stop the Egyptians who were trying to help the Assyrians fight the Babylonians. Okay, 2 Chronicles 35, verse 21 and 22 shows that Necho tried to convince Josiah to leave him alone, and Josiah insisted. I take a lot of that. That's a summary of the history of Israel by John Davis and John Whitcomb. Actually, two of them went together, and there's some great books about this in the Old Testament time period. Anyway, so Josiah goes out and disguises himself and attacks Pharaoh Necho of Egypt in the valley of Armageddon. So here's Josiah. He goes up into this valley of Armageddon. It's a big open area, and he's going to face the Egyptian army and stop them because he feels a threat. Why wouldn't he feel a threat? The Egyptian army is crossing his land. Okay, so it makes sense from a human standpoint, but God had clearly told him not to go. And Josiah goes out, tries to stop him, and he's killed there in the valley of Armageddon. Of course, that's the northern kingdom, but the northern kingdom is no more. There is no northern kingdom at this point. So he's killed in the battle there, and that's how Josiah dies. That's the end of his reign. Jeremiah weeps at his death, but never praises or mentions the revival that takes place under Josiah. Okay, so that's about 612 BC. Okay, so let's keep our dates in mind here. 612, Josiah's death. 612, of course, also represents around that time, 610. This also is the time period where the Babylonians defeat the Assyrian army at Carchemish. Read about that sometime. An unbelievable battle that takes place there. Very, very interesting. So the Babylonians come, conquer the Assyrians. When will the Babylonians come to Jerusalem and make the first, what we call the first deportation? They defeat Judah and deport a huge amount of the Israelis, children of Israel, out of the land and over to Babylon. When does that happen? The first deportation? 605. Okay, so the first deportation. Was Josiah right? Were the Egyptians right in assuming and fearing that the Babylonians would continue on the march? Absolutely. They knew that, they understood that. Okay, so they had a reasonable fear of the Babylonian army, the Babylonian Empire, coming into the land. All right. No doubt Daniel was affected by this revival. Daniel is taken out of the land of Israel in the first deportation. He's a young man. All right. We know this from several things. We believe this, I should say, from several different factors. In the book of Daniel, he is in Babylon during all of the major events. Okay, when you've got the different kings, when you have the different Babylonian kings, and Daniel being present there with them, that fits into the Babylonian history. Daniel was also there when the Medes and the Persians came along. King Cyrus. When was that? Not 332. He went 250 years old. Okay? I'll go way down here because we'll need some space. But 538. The Medes and the Persians come in and overthrow the Babylonians. That was the night that Belshazzar saw the handwriting on the wall. Okay, so that story, I think it's Daniel chapter 5, that story takes place at the end of his life. He's an older man. When Daniel went into the den of lions, okay, he was an old man at that point, probably 90 years old or so at least, if he was a young man back when he was deported. 70 years later, of course. So, no doubt Daniel was affected by this revival. You could also make the argument for the 3 Hebrew boys, that they were affected by this revival. They were young men going to a foreign country and taking a stand against a foreign king. I think certainly they were affected by this revival back in the land of Judah. All right, so again, try to picture or try to get the big picture here of the Babylonians. The first deportation is about to take place, but Josiah is killed in this battle that really shouldn't have affected him much. And his son, Jehoahaz, is put on the throne, or he actually tried to take the throne, and he only lasted for 3 months. And he's imprisoned by Pharaoh Necho. So what actually happened here, the Bible calls him a king, but he tried to take the throne, and Pharaoh Necho, going through to the north, he comes back through and says, no, you're not going to be the king. You're not fit to be the king. And I'm going to put someone else in the king who is more favorable to the Egyptians, like your brother. And there's evidence of that his brother, Jehoiakim, was much more favorable towards the Egyptians. Well, of course, while he's replacing kings, Pharaoh Necho, he also obtains a ransom of silver and gold, and a lot of that, of course, came from the temple and from Jewish storages where they would have kept their wealth. Next, so Jehoahaz, he's a very short reigning king, but he's a usurper, really. He's trying to take the throne, and he didn't have enough strength to hold on to it. Jehoiakim, also known as Eliakim, 611 to 599. So he's going to be the king during the takeover of the Babylonians, right? The fall of Jerusalem. And they're going to allow him to be the king, to remain the king, if he keeps their rules, if he pays the tribute and so on. So Jehoiakim, he also is the son of Josiah. So notice here, we have Josiah's son Jehoahaz, Josiah's son Jehoiakim. Then we have Jehoiakim's son Jehoiakim. And then we have another son of Josiah, which would be Jehoiakim's uncle, Zedekiah. All right, so 3 sons of Josiah, and one of their sons is a king of the last 4 kings. By the way, it's interesting that Josiah had more of his sons reign as king than any other king. Of course, would you want, what he had? His 3 sons all get defeated by major world powers. So it wasn't anything too much to brag about. All right, several things that happened under Jehoiakim. All right, first of all, we see that Necho's tribute. They raised the tribute, the amount of tribute. And he doesn't like to pay that, but King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon comes in, and he becomes the receiving end of that tribute. He imposes tribute on the people for three years, and Jehoiakim says, wait a second, I don't want to pay this tribute. I don't like paying this. And so Nebuchadnezzar says, well, sorry, you're going to pay it anyway. If you don't, we're going to come in and defeat you. And that's exactly what they do. Go to 2 Kings chapter 23. 2 Kings chapter 23. Beginning part of the chapter, we see still Josiah, I believe, yes. All right, go down to verse 31. Let's back up several of these things we're saying. Jehoahaz was 23 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 3 months. He did that which is evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his fathers had done. Pharaoh Necho put him in bands at Riblah in the land of Hamath, that he might not reign in Jerusalem. So actually, he didn't ever reign in Jerusalem. He was in the battlefield in Hamath. That's up towards Syria and Damascus. And he put the land to a tribute of 100 talents of silver and a talent of gold. And Pharaoh Necho made Eliakim, the son of Josiah, king in the room of Josiah's father, and turned his name to Jehoiakim, and took Jehoahaz away, and he came to Egypt and died there. Jehoiakim gave the silver and the gold to Pharaoh, but he taxed the land to give the money according to the command of Pharaoh. He exacted the silver and the gold of the people of the land. Jehoiakim was 25 years old, and he began to reign. He reigned 11 years. His mother's name and so on. He did that which is evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his fathers had done. In his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up. And Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him. So we're talking 611. Jehoiakim takes over. 3 years after that, it'd be 608, 607. And he stops paying the tribute. And so Nebuchadnezzar takes him a couple years to get down there with his army and force them to pay the tribute. And of course, he takes a lot of people captive. The Lord sent against him the bands of the Chaldees, and bands of the Syrians, and bands of the Moabites, bands of the children of Ammon, and sent them against Judah to destroy it. That sounds just like what happened in the days of the judges, doesn't it? Foreigners coming in to oppress them. According to the word of the Lord, which he spake by his servants the prophets. Surely at the command of the Lord came this upon Judah, to remove them out of his sight. Why? For the sins of Manasseh. 30, 40 years earlier, 50, 60 years earlier, the sins of Manasseh, God didn't forget those. for the innocent blood he shed, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood. Verse 7, and the king of Egypt came not again any more out of his land, for the king of Babylon had taken from the river of Egypt unto the river Euphrates all that pertained to the king of Egypt. So, all of this area that belonged to, that was basically the land of Israel. The river of Egypt is somewhere in this area down towards the Red Sea, this arm of the Red Sea, all the way up to the river Euphrates. So, land of Judah, Israel, Hamath or Syria, all of this area, the Babylonians conquered, and the Egyptians lost that territory. So now, the kings of Judah are under the rule of the Babylonians. Verse 8, Jehoiakim was 18 years old when he began to reign. He reigned in Jerusalem 3 months in his mother's name. He did that which is evil in the sight of the Lord. At that time, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came against Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. This is the first deportation. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came against the city, and his servants did besiege it. And Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother and his servants and his princes and his offers, and they gave themselves up. King of Babylon took him in the 8th year of his reign, and carried out thence all the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house. Okay, I think I said that wrong. This is not the first deportation. This is the second deportation. All right, so under Jehoiakim, you have the first deportation. There's raiders from nearby lands. The rest of Jehoiakim's reign, he dies. His son Jehoiakim becomes the king. Number 19 then, Jehoiakim, he reigns for a short time, only 3 months. And really, again, this is a period of transition again. They rebel, and in the midst of their rebellion, they get a new king. Babylonians come. It takes them months just to get there with their armies. But this second deportation then will take place under Jehoiakim, right? Yes. And this is typically, you see this as 597 or 598 as the second deportation. The second time that the Babylonians come, and, to the Babylonians, land of Israel is just a huge irritation. It's a small country. It's not it's not Egypt. It's not Syria even. It's just a small irritation. And under this deportation, Jehoiakim is taken captive. His uncle Zedekiah is installed as king. Ezekiel is taken captive to Babylon. So Ezekiel, that great prophet, all of his prophetic work takes place in the land of Babylon, not in the land of Judah. Okay, it's at this point then also that Jehoiakim is cursed, that none of his descendants would rule. That's why the next king is not of the same family line. I know they're actually uncle and nephew, but they would, of course, have a different family line. So that the King Jesus, the king that eventually would come, would be from the line of David, but would not be from the line of Jehoiakim. And that'll be very interesting, because there's several people in the land of Babylon that will end up coming back to the land of Judah in the returns that are of the line of Jehoiakim, and therefore cursed not to be the kings. Okay, so we'll see that later on when we get to the returns. All right, so his uncle Zedekiah, another son of Josiah, is installed as the king. What time do I have? 9:30? 9:30. All right, I got enough time to finish this. So it's Zedekiah, the son of Josiah, known as Mattaniah originally. His name is changed by the Babylonians. He reigns for 11 years. He's put on the throne by Nebuchadnezzar, and the Jews never really accepted him. The book of Ezekiel, chapter 17, Ezekiel, a prophet in Babylon, states how Zedekiah swore that he would remain loyal and then broke his promise. Daniel, who had just become the supreme interpreter of dreams, may have had influence on Nebuchadnezzar not destroying Jerusalem earlier at the beginning of Zedekiah's reign, 598, the second deportation. It is odd, isn't it, that Nebuchadnezzar would give a country, a city, 3 chances, or actually 2 chances, and then finally the third time destroy them in 586. So, the disobedience, destruction of Jerusalem takes place in 586 when Zedekiah rebels against the Babylonians again and breaks his promise. Jeremiah, and I don't have time to go into this today. We'll save this for the class period after our test. But we're going to see how Jeremiah is looked at as a traitor. Actually, you know what? I'm sorry. I will cover this. I'm thinking of something else that I'm not going to cover until later. I want to prove to you some things extra biblically, some things that will show that these stories happened exactly the way that God said they did. And those are some very interesting things. But Jeremiah was thought to have been a traitor. Let's turn to Jeremiah chapter 37. Jeremiah chapter 37. Verse number 11. By the way, we're going to just, I feel like we're just skimming over this. In order to study this entire time period correctly, you have to go through the book of Jeremiah. And we don't have time for that. But Jeremiah, he was there. His stories are first-hand accounts. Okay, those carry weight. He wrote down exactly what happened around this time period. But here in Jeremiah chapter 37, verse number 11, it came to pass that when the army of the Chaldeans, that's the Babylonians, was broken up from Jerusalem for fear of Pharaoh's army, then Jeremiah went forth out of Jerusalem to go into the land of Benjamin to separate himself thence in the midst of the people. And when he was in the gate of Benjamin, a captain of the ward was there, whose name was Irijah, the son of Shelemiah, the son of Hananiah. And he took Jeremiah the prophet, saying, Thou fallest away to the Chaldeans. You are sneaking away to go to the side of the Babylonians, aren't you? And Jeremiah says, It is false. I fall not away to the Chaldeans. But he hearkened not to him. Irijah didn't listen to him. So Irijah took Jeremiah and brought him to the princes. Wherefore the princes were wroth with Jeremiah and smote him and put him in prison in the house of Jonathan the scribe, for they had made that prison. And he remains there many days. He was thought to have been a traitor to the Babylonians. And over, Jeremiah said to the people, as the Babylonians came back in 586, Jeremiah said, give yourselves up. Surrender yourselves. Reminds you of the story of Josephus. Now give yourselves up. They're going to destroy this city if you don't. If they would have given themselves up, almost surely the temple wouldn't have been burned by the Babylonians. Well, anyway, they thought he was a traitor. Now, you'll see there 3 reasons why he could not have been a traitor, why he was not defecting to the Babylonians. 3 reasons. These are important. First, the tears that he shed over the fallen city. He loved the city of Jerusalem. He wasn't defecting to the Babylonians for himself. The tears he shed. Lamentations talks about this, obviously. The word means weepings. Jeremiah wept over the city of Jerusalem. In Jeremiah chapter 40, you see another reason why he could not have been a traitor. Jeremiah 40, verse 4. This is after he has an opportunity to leave. He doesn't take it. He has an opportunity not just to leave, to go to Babylon. And he turns it down. Here, the captain of the guard offers him the opportunity to go. And now, behold, I loose thee this day from the chains which were upon thine hand. If it seem good unto thee to come with me into Babylon, come. And I will look well unto thee. But if it seem ill unto thee to come with me into Babylon, forbear. Behold, all the land is before thee. Whither it seemeth good and convenient for thee to go, thither go. And Jeremiah turns it down and rejects the offer. Okay? Jeremiah was not trying to leave and defect to the Babylonians. Third reason is in Jeremiah 50 and 51, he denounces pagan Babylon. So here are three evidences that Jeremiah was not defecting to the Babylonians. Now, why did he tell them to surrender then? Why, was he on their side? No. He was telling them to surrender because he saw what was going to happen to them from 605 to 538 when they returned. He saw the punishment that they were going to go through. He knew what the Babylonians would do to them. He said, just surrender. Give yourselves up and let God have his punishment. God's going to punish you. Just give yourselves up. All right, so the king, of course, Zedekiah, he rebelled against the instructions of Jeremiah and continued the fight against the Babylonians, and eventually the Babylonians conquered the city of Jerusalem. Ark of the Covenant was taken or hidden, and that ark has never been rediscovered. I don't care what you read on the internet. It has not been rediscovered. Sorry? Ron Wyatt, yeah, and all these other things. But the glory departed from the land of Israel. It's the Ichabod. This is the Ichabod moment for the kingdom of Israel, of Judah. All right, so this is the time of God's judgment. Kings dethroned, people deported, the city destroyed, the temple desecrated, the land itself desolated. And then let me point out three reasons why God allowed Judah to suffer the horrors of Babylonian captivity. A couple of these are for bigger reasons. Of course, it's for individual sins of kings as well. Zedekiah first, this is the temporary, immediate reason for the fall of Jerusalem. Zedekiah refused God's word through Jeremiah and broke his oath to Nebuchadnezzar. So God said, okay, enough's enough. So Zedekiah is the immediate reason, but in the larger scope, it's because the priests and the people were heathens. They scoffed at God's prophets. They polluted the temple. And the third reason is because they hadn't observed the Sabbath year. Every 7 years, they hadn't observed that at all. And so God said, okay, now you're going to observe a whole bunch of Sabbaths all at once. 70 years to make up for the 490 years every 7 years that you didn't do it. God's provision for the sabbatical year had been neglected, and God's going to get his time back. Okay, so those are the reasons why God allowed Judah to suffer the horrors of Babylon captivity.